Okay, let's see. Just to review a few tips on perspective sketching. The idea that you're starting with a vertical edge that you can see, and using that as a unit of measurement, and judging relative to that your height projected onto that edge, which then establishes a horizon line. And the third line that you draw, which is gauging the slope of a line receding into the distance, is pretty important, because once you establish that slope, again relative to a horizontal line, that angle, once you establish that and you establish the horizon line, then you can draw a whole series of lines that converge at the same point simply by taking half the distance there, half the distance there, and drawing another line. You can continue to subdivide and draw a whole series of lines that are converging at the same point. You can also go below the horizon line by simply reproducing that angle, a mirror image of it, and so on. Once you establish a horizon line, a vertical edge, and a major sloping line, then the logic of the perspective takes over. Similarly, if you establish that line, then you should be able to establish other lines converging to the same point by interpolating between that line and the horizon line. And it's pretty easy, even if you're drawing in ink, to correct the slope by going over those edges. Okay, again, starting with a vertical edge in the scene and the horizon line relative to that edge. Major sloping line. Critical judgment is, if that's the height, how much do we see of that plane? So keeping in mind in perspective, if a plane and plan is receding in this direction, what we see in perspective may only be that. So there's a foreshortening occurring. And we need to be able to judge that distance, even though we know that plane to be that long, it may only appear to be that wide. And so we can use this as a unit of measurement. So we have to look at whether or not that distance is equal to that height, 1.5 times that height, or say 2/3 of that height, in which case it would be here, it could be there, and it could be there. So we have to make that judgment. What we have to be careful of is not drawing what we know that width of this plane to be, but how it appears in perspective. So if you have a series of equally spaced elements, say a series of lampposts or a series of arches, receding into the distance, and once you gauge the space from the one to the next, you can reproduce the spacing by simply introducing a series of diagonals. Technically, these diagonals are going to be converging, but you can use them as a gauge, as a rough rule of thumb, to get equal spacing in perspective, which diminishes as they go away from you. So you can begin to simply do that, and then we can turn them into a series of lampposts or a series of arches. Okay?